Hello, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the co-founder and CEO with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. We have helped life science companies from across the globe over the past 14 years to help them with everything from digital advisory boards, online medical education, virtual investigator meetings. And since the launch of our award-winning Insight Events platform, we've also been helping pharma companies with MSL and sales rep training, large corporate events, innovation hackathons, and everything in between. But more importantly, at Impetus, we believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations with some of the leading edge thinkers, the digital provocateurs, and the healthcare thought leaders, we can all work together to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm super excited about having some of these thought leaders at the table with me today. The first person I'd like to introduce to you is Aahuti Rai. She actually founded the change and innovation consultancy company called 4 Points Consulting, and she did this in 2001. She's been working with leaders of major brands to empower them to create impact for their stakeholders. So although 4 Points works across sectors, it was her work with the healthcare and life sciences sectors that brought her healthy obsession with health, and also to the forefront, and led her to pave her way into the digital health space. She believes that the combination of a human component and a digital component has the power to transform the healthcare experience of every patient from being simply a passive recipient of healthcare and medicine into a proactive, accountable, health-seeking individual. I love that new definition of a patient. Also at the table with me today, we have Jessica Smith. She's actually the co-founder and CXO of SomX, where she heads up the client experience and public relations departments. Previously an associate director at the global agency Fleishman Hillard, Jessica has broad experience in healthcare communications across NHS, corporate, charity, health tech, and pharma industry clients. She specializes in building leading teams that design and deliver integrated and targeted communication strategies that speaks to the vast array of audiences within the healthcare field, ranging from healthcare professionals and policymakers to patients and consumers. Welcome, Aahuti and Jessica. So good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So wide variety of things to talk about here. Both of you have a widespread background in healthcare. I think maybe we'll just take a couple of minutes, maybe starting out with you, Aahuti, maybe sharing a little bit about your career trajectory, how you landed in today. We'll go to you, Jessica. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you ended up starting to work together as well.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for having us. So as you said in the intro there, Natalie, 20 years ago, I founded 4 Points Consulting. Prior to that, I had 10 years in the corporate space doing a variety of tech and operational roles. 4 Points was really about delivering strategic services to corporates. And those services being around, business model redefinition, disruptive strategies, transformation, innovation, large-scale change. And for 20 years, that's what I focused on with my team. And we worked, as you said, across about 13 different sectors, 60 different organizations, and that saw us doing a whole host of different things when it comes to disruptive strategy and innovation. So 3 years ago, I made a very conscious decision to enter the health sector exclusively and to focus on that for my third career. And within the health sector, I narrowed that down specifically to health tech for a variety of reasons, which I'm sure we'll end up getting into talking about as the discussion goes on. And so present day, here I am. I work as a strategic advisor to startups in the health tech space, focusing on really helping them to set up and succeed and scale with their innovation. So very much a commercial focus.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And Jessica, how about you?
Sure. So as you said, my background is in healthcare communications, and I started off my career working in the NHS in the UK's National Health Service. I worked for different third sector and charity organisations before coming back round to health at the Royal College of Physicians, where I learned a great deal about healthcare policy and lots of different stakeholders in the healthcare space. And it was really there that I first stumbled across HealthTech. When it was the very early days of the industry, if that's what you can call it then, and when people were just starting to think about how technology could be used in healthcare in a meaningful and safe way. And so I worked with a small team of people who were starting to kind of put some thought behind that and start to think about the legislation that would need to be in place, and also how the technologies could be meaningfully used. I then went over to agency side, working again in healthcare, but I think most people will tell you that healthcare agencies predominantly focus on the pharmaceutical industry. And I learned a great deal there about the pharma industry and biotech, but also quickly realized how segmented healthcare really was, and how actually they're almost kind of sub-industries within an industry that really didn't talk to each other. And at the same time I was there, I met my co-founder, Dr. James Somaru, who is a doctor by training, and he was moving into health tech as well. And obviously health tech is a new industry, so lots of the companies working in that space were startups, and realized that they needed to be able to communicate with lots of different people in the space, but we're never really sure how. And so we really spotted an opportunity there to create an offering that would help these kinds of organizations really have their voice heard, and really kind of have their purpose felt as well. And so I guess speed, a couple of years forward, and here we are with SomX, working exclusively with health tech clients. Health tech itself is really broad, so all sorts of different technologies, all sorts of different focus areas, and therapy areas as well. So it's always very interesting. It keeps you on your toes, and it's always very fast moving. But there's also so much to learn because it is such an immature industry. And I think we'll come on to talk about some of the trials and tribulations and opportunities that comes along with that. But that's actually how I met Aahuti. So Aahuti came on board with one of our clients, and we did a lot of work together, again, focusing on a few different healthcare audiences, right from pharma all the way through to patients. And I think we just really kind of hit it off, struck a chord. The kind of work that we were doing, I think, really chimed. And I think our purpose and kind of values really aligned as well. And I think certainly from my perspective, that's one of the biggest lessons for me, is finding companies and people who really align with what you believe in.
So let's actually just we're going to kind of go macro and then sort of isolate into the micro. So we're talking about healthcare, this large, disparate, crazy, complex system of ecosystems that are all interrelated, and it's just a crazy mayhem. And then and layered on top of that, there's pre-COVID, and then there's post-COVID. So let's actually just talk about like sort of the inception of this idea of health tech and people getting into technology. Once upon a time, pharma were just creating chemical entities, and these chemical entities were prescribed by physicians, and physicians prescribed them to patients, and they took them, and away we went. These people were patients. The world has turned upside down, and I'm curious if we just sort of take a look at the big picture. The intervention of health technologies, getting away from the traditional, beyond the pill. Tell us a little bit about what your interpretation of technologies, and who are the target audiences that have started to be the pioneers around this, who started taking these on. Maybe we'll start with you, Aahuti, as well.
Sure, thank you. Wow, where to begin with that? Because it is a macro view and we can go in all sorts of directions with that. So I guess health tech in this context, technology is not a new concept in healthcare. Some of our early work going back to, 2001, 2002 was working in the National Health Service and driving transformation and digital clinical pathways with the use of text messaging instead of faxing between a physician and a hospital, for example, and trying to consolidate patient information into one record and trying to make sure that you can book appointments via email and not have to phone your surgery. You know, I mean, this was kind of the beginnings of technology, right? And a lot of the larger enterprise systems and players were, you know, innovating in this space, and change was difficult in healthcare even then. I remember one particular project we did with a community services provider in the UK, where they were struggling to meet the demand in terms of physiotherapy volumes, in terms of patients that needed appointments. And the one simple fix was that the system where they were allocating appointments was being used incorrectly. And we sliced off 6 weeks from the waiting time just using the technology the way that it was intended to be used. So, you know, I guess when we talk about technology in healthcare, there is a vast array. It dates way back. I think when we bring it back to present day, obviously the fast pace, you know, developments in this space with mobile technology, etc., has opened up a whole other array of possibility here. But I think the challenges kind of remain the same when it comes to adoption and implementation that we saw 20 years back. I think if we think pre-COVID, a lot of innovation was there. It was sitting on the shelf. We were struggling to get attention because the healthcare sector is so institutionalized. And some of that is for good reason, and it's understandable and very reasonable. And we need that level of institutionalization, because we shouldn't be able to just disrupt you know, something that needs to be so safe and secure and tested. But in other aspects, it kind of keeps us anchored in the past when so much else is possible with what's available now. So I think if we think pre-COVID, I read a paper that was actually dated, well, way back, but 2012 was supposed to be the year of HealthTech, mobile health applications. You know, that was a prediction at the time that 2012, 2014, those would be the wonder years for mobile health. And what's ended up happening is actually it's been 2020 to 2022, and COVID has made that difference, because what it's done is it's created a burning platform. We had no other option, a sector that has been so institutionalized and, you know, weighed down with legacy and protocols and regulation, suddenly has had to, you know, think on its feet. And it's not like a ton of innovation has suddenly happened. That innovation was there. I entered the digital health sector pre-COVID, you know, and I was absolutely amazed at what was possible, the art of what was possible, but it was sitting there on the shelf and it was struggling to get attention. So post-COVID, you know, we've got that attention and we've seen the investment dollars, you know, skyrocket. I think what we'll probably see over the coming few years is some of the noise, you know, will filter out, and then we'll get a true sense of what's going to remain, what's going to be, you know, what's going to stick, and what's going to be this kind of hybrid approach to healthcare. But for me, the real kind of focus, the real art of what's possible is really around the patient solutions and the remote monitoring of patients. You know, telemedicine, telecare are amazing, important components of how we deliver healthcare, you know, but what's actually going to transform healthcare, I feel, is the space around, you know, the diagnostic space, the self-care space, remote monitoring, you know, and the patient-facing solutions. That's where I really see the potential.
Nice. How about you, Jessica? And from a, you know, a large macro view, what have you seen pre-COVID, post-COVID? What are you most excited about, or what are some of the key focal areas for you as well? So
someone once said to me that healthcare is a slow ship to turn. And I think it's so, so true. Healthcare has always been considerably further behind than so many other industries, almost all industries in the technology space. So I think that, as Aahuti says, is for good reason, because you can't disrupt healthcare. and you shouldn't disrupt healthcare, because ultimately it's a matter of life and death. It's people's lives and people's health that matters. And so it does have to be done in the right way and in a safe way. And I think it's taken a long time to find where that safe space is. And I think COVID has definitely accelerated things out of necessity. But I think previously, health tech was really kind of perceived to be medical devices that perhaps big pharma were developing, rather than health tech as we know it today, which is a vast array of different technologies doing so many different things in very innovative ways, rather than large pieces of machinery, perhaps supporting with surgeries or, that kind of thing. So I think COVID has definitely created, an opportunity for the technologies that have been sat on the shelf to kind of come into their own and to almost throw a lot of things at the wall to see what sticks. And I don't think, I think there's just been so much that it's going to take a little bit of time for us to kind of weed through that almost and understand where the true opportunity now is in the new normal, for want of a lovely buzzword, and what patients now need and want from their health service. And I think the real opportunity, actually, from my point of view, is in, I guess, empowering patients in their own care, finding ways to do that, but also building the kind of physician and patient relationship using technology and using digital innovation in such a way that it enhances the human relationship rather than detracts from that, so that it also empowers healthcare professionals to get back to doing what they really want to do and do the things that really drove them right from the beginning to join the healthcare profession, to really care for patients. And I think that is going to be the best thing that comes out of this. And I think one of the really brilliant opportunities, and I think we're just not there yet. So I think we see reports of these really long waiting lists, the burdens on healthcare systems. So there is still some way to go. But I think if we can really address that with technology, I think it paints a much brighter future for healthcare than perhaps we've seen before.
You both mentioned that COVID has been a major groundswell, a tailwind, an accelerant, if you will, of change that was inevitable anyway. So one of the things that really took a major spin to it was the idea around clinical trials. When COVID-19 happened, many clinical trials literally stopped in their tracks. And so that was a huge momentum around getting centralized trials decentralized and starting to talk a lot about these patient-reported outcomes, electronic consent reporting, and wearables, and all these sorts of things, changing the endpoints in clinical trials, et cetera. Aahuti, I was wondering if you could actually speak a little bit to this, because this is, again, a little bit of an empowerment play for patients in their healthcare. Tell us about what your thoughts are on the adoption and some of the challenges that still lie ahead around decentralized or hybrid trials.
Yes, so I think my thoughts around this perhaps are not necessarily specific to trials. Certainly sort of the work I get involved with, my experience is in that space, but also outside of that space. So I think, what's being made possible, and stating the obvious to start with, is really just, how we can come away from the kind of more regulated, structured trial settings into sort of a more real world context here when it comes to trials. Decentralized trials makes that possible. And whilst randomized controlled trials have always been regarded as the gold standard, and forgive me, audience, for saying this, I've always found that to be a little bit, I guess, really difficult to get behind. Yes, great from a clinical perspective, but I've always struggled with that from a real world perspective. People in a trial are incentivized, they're given instructions, things are regulated, so if there's a positive outcome from the trial, it's the process of the RCT itself that will have somewhat biased that outcome, just because of the level of regulation and instruction and structure that's put into a trial. So what the first kind of benefit that I saw with the possibility of decentralized trials and the adoption there, partly out of no choice, these trials had to continue. That was important. And it's the fact that we've kind of blurred the line a little bit in a good way, that we've actually started having trials in settings that are not kind of in a lab formulation. They're not so structured. There's opportunity and room for other variables to kind of come into play, which is all part of being in the real world. And, the traditional challenges around, patient recruitment, identifying them, having people stay on board for the duration of the trial, all of those kind of classic challenges, we've somewhat been able to overcome to an extent. So I feel that what this has paved the way for is a meeting of the standard, very regulated, structured RCTs starting to blend with the world of, real world evidence, which I think is an important step forward.
Beautiful. And Jessica, your thoughts on real world evidence, real world data, and how this comes into play with health tech. How are we going to be utilizing technologies to speed us forward in this place, and also to be able to get into, as you were alluding to earlier, a better scenario of patient or health consumer and physician relationship?
That's a great question. So I really think that it's a huge opportunity. And I think what these decentralized trials has enabled us to do is also, I guess, gain an insight into how these kinds of technologies are going to really benefit patient care in the long run outside of the parameters of the trial. Because whether you're in a trial or you're receiving care, when you see a doctor or a physician or any kind of healthcare professional, you will see them for a scheduled appointment at a allotted moment in time, maybe every 6 months, maybe more frequently than that. But the healthcare professional or the trial lead, for instance, will have very little to no engagement with the patient in that in-between time. So they really have no view on what is going on with the patient as they go about their life and how they live their life. And so it actually is giving us such a rich body of data to really understand patients and genuinely really provide personalized care, because we understand who these patients are as people. I think that's really key. It's about more than just talking about patients. It's understanding someone as a person and how a condition or a medicine or an intervention affects their life, and therefore how you can adapt a particular treatment regimen or management plan to fit in with their life, and therefore enable better outcomes over and above the very regimented endpoints that we see traditionally used in RCTs, because you get to measure so much more impact because there is so much more data to draw from. And so I think from the clinical trial perspective, that's fantastic, because you learn so much more about a cohort of patients, of people, and you can refine and iterate to such a greater extent. But also from the health system perspective, it, as I say, it enables genuine person-centered care and personalized care in a way that we've never seen before. And it also enables a physician to have had insight into what that person has been doing between X and Y period, and then have a really in-depth and connected discussion with that person about what they've been experiencing, rather than asking them exactly what it is. They've seen that already, so they can interrogate some of that a bit more and understand some of those data points and put some color on it to then have real impact.
Absolutely. Sounds absolutely amazing. So Aahuti, I just was curious as well too, we've been talking a little bit about, the deeper delve into, technologies, how technologies are going to help patients, real world evidence, increasing the propensity for deeper and more insightful relationships between healthcare providers and health consumers. I was also just curious about where you saw this with the overall you call this the whole health approach, as we sort of delve further into this in the future about what healthcare is going to look like. You have alluded very nicely about this idea of two components, the human component and the digital component. Can you sort of speak to that about what is the vision of the whole health approach?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking this question because it's something I'm so passionate about, actually. So I think something Jessica said earlier as well, I kind of want to pick up on that in addressing this point. So if we, I think everyone would nod when we say healthcare is fragmented, in terms of how care is delivered. But I think if we kind of just define that a little bit more, we treat mind and body as separate things in a person, right? It's very rare to go for treatment on some kind of a physical condition and have that same pathway help you with the secondary symptoms of whatever that condition may manifest, so in terms of your mental health or your anxiety or your loneliness, we separate in healthcare, health and social care. Those are two separate systems, and yet, I need both, and I need the integration of both. We separate primary and secondary care, especially here in the UK. I'm pretty sure that that's a standard model around the world, right? And we also separate illness and wellness as well. And most healthcare systems are very focused on dealing with illness and not necessarily in optimizing for wellness. So, when we talk about a fragmented system, we can define that in all sorts of ways. But if we bring it back to your question around whole health, for me, it's quite a multifaceted definition where, we are just seeing the person as one. What's happened is our healthcare system takes one person and splits them up into many different parts in whatever way suits that particular pathway or that particular physician. And even the treatments that are then prescribed and given don't necessarily consider comorbidities, don't necessarily consider the impacts on that person's lifestyle in having to deal with that treatment protocol. So, whole health for me is really about, and this is where I see the potential of health tech. I don't see it as a means to an end. I don't see it as a silver bullet. It's not like the panacea for everything, but it's an enabler. And that's what it's got the potential to enable, because, and this is what a lot of these innovators are doing, and why I'm in the land of startups, because I'm thoroughly excited by how they're bringing together all of these different facets, that traditional biomedical approaches have, split apart, and they're bringing them together. We're bringing together behavioral science and lifestyle changes and the medical condition together in a companion app that also supports a clinical pathway and a treatment protocol. And that's how it should be, because ultimately I am one person, and I need to be treated as such.
Yeah, beautifully said. I absolutely love that, the concept. That brings me to my question to you, Jessica, around health technology assessment, sort of the traditional way that drugs get approved. Now we're actually talking about software as medical device. In the US, there's called the 510K, and there's all sorts of other legislation and approval processes. Tell us a little bit about where you see some of the regulatory hurdles or opportunities in the future to bring these technologies that are what Aahuti was mentioning, bringing the bigger picture, being able to treat people in a much more holistic way. So what is that going to look like in the future?
So I think to start with, these processes are not tech native, they're not digital native. And I think that is the first barrier in itself, because to take an example, which is not digital health related, but having worked in pharma, a lot of the work I was doing at the time was bringing social media to pharma. And that was not a new concept for anybody, social media, everyone knew about it. But because it was such a risk-averse industry to be in, they were slow to adapt, but also there was such a kind of fear around it because there was no track record of success. No one knew actually how to get it through the internal approval systems that were needed. And I think technology and health tech is very much seeing the same thing right now. The legislation, the policies, those regulatory bodies, they're not set up for technology. And I think the real challenge is that even when they get to that point that they are, technology has already outpaced that legislation. It's already moved on beyond that. And so I actually think that HTAs, that entire process needs a total rethink, because when you think of like an AI algorithm evolves over time, it learns. And so when you approve an algorithm today, tomorrow it's going to be doing something different. And so how can you build a regulatory system that allows that evolution in a safe way? And I don't actually know what the answer is here, because as I said before, you have to innovate in such a safe way in healthcare because people's lives are at stake, to be really direct about it. And I think it has to bring together digital natives, technologists with people who exist in HTAs already, and kind of bring together both sets of experience. And at the moment, I think that probably the existing frameworks are lacking for the most part in the experience and input from the technologists and those kinds of experts. But I think it has to be an entire ecosystem approach. And we talked before about how healthcare itself is so fragmented. And, traditionally, none of those audiences really talk to each other that well. Then don't really communicate with each other particularly effectively. And I think we're seeing the consequence of that then, therefore, in the HTA. So bringing everyone to the table, right from patients all the way through to physicians, payers, technologists, innovators, health system representatives, policymakers, big pharma, biotech, everyone at the table to be able to provide input and their perspective, because they all hold their own truth. And it's only by combining them all that you get a real sense of the actual fundamentals of what we need to do. And so I think it's kind of a team effort, if I'm honest. Yeah. But quite frankly, I don't know how we get there yet. But I think it's one of the big challenges with COVID is that in many ways, the regulatory systems were relaxed in order to allow the innovation to come forward and meet the needs of patients and healthcare systems. And now we're kind of retrospectively trying to build those. And that's been no bad thing. That's had to happen. But I think we still have a way to go before we get to a place where we feel comfortable even evolving regulatory systems with technology and with healthcare and how we perceive health, I think.
Yeah, beautifully said. And it sounds like it's in some ways, the way I'm hearing it, it's almost like sounding like a forest fire, that sometimes within the, there's always new brush that grows amidst the ashes. It's sort of the phoenix in the ashes. Yeah. And sometimes the solution doesn't necessarily exist in the legacy frameworks we already have. It's sometimes in some of these startups that you are working with, where some of that new thinking, the new legislation, the new ecosystem, I'm thinking blockchain, I'm thinking about new styles of how people are working, everything from decentralized autonomous organizations or DAOs to smart contracts, to all sorts of innovative ways of thinking besides the technology. So I'm curious, Aahuti, in your world, because I know that you do a lot of work with startups, is what are some of the key things and key themes that you try to iterate to them based on the fact that they are going to be working within legacy frameworks before things move ahead? What are some of the core things that you warn them about, making sure that they embed into their technologies or in their thinking or in their business models, so that they can start to make a meaningful impact in healthcare?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it's about making choices. So startups, quite rightly, have a tendency to be opportunistic. Being opportunistic in this sector can be very time consuming and a big distraction, because as soon as you jump at an opportunity because somebody, in a particular country has taken an interest in your solution, you're kind of off on that track, but that track has a different regulatory system. It has different requirements that you have to, and hurdles that you have to pass through. So one of the things that I urge all of the startups that I work with is, let's get really clear on evaluating all of the different commercial options from the outset. Leave 20% room for opportunity and to jump at that. But you're in the health sector here, and whilst you might be a tech firm in a health sector, all of your stakeholders are likely to be incumbents, and are likely to be people entrenched, or organizations and individuals, decision makers, that are entrenched in policy and regulation and want to see evidence of outcomes and effectiveness. And it doesn't matter in the early days that you're a young tech startup that's able to kind of fail fast and innovate and, kind of pivot. And at the end of the day, you're doing all of that contextualized in a health space. So being very intentional from the outset around evaluating business models and commercial options, and being very mindful around saying no to some things from the outset so that you can have some focus is really important. Now, that said, early stage startups are still trying to find their product market fit. So I think the other important aspect is, I guess being very, trying very hard to objectively remove that bias that most founders have about their product. And, kind of recognizing that, yes, there was an opportunity spotted, this product was developed, but, what were some of the assumptions that were made when this was developed? And let's first and foremost go and test those assumptions, and do that as early as possible. And then the final thing that I would say is really choosing the right investors, because it's a whole especially now, especially since COVID, obviously there's a lot of focus on the health tech space. And with that comes a whole variety of investors, some that have a very authentic purpose around succeeding, wanting their startups to succeed in this space, not just for the profit, but because of the impact that they can create. But with that also comes investors that perhaps are not used to investing in the health space. And so what they have in terms of their own kind of ROI models and impact assessments are all kind of based on other industries. And in this industry, there's a huge amount of investment and focus and attention that pays off much later, but that needs to be spent on some boring stuff up front, around the evidence generation and around, really kind of demonstrating some clinical safety, demonstrating your data protection, demonstrating technical assurance, and, your capability to integrate, and, those kind of dimensions pay off much later, but they do pay off, and the scale comes a lot quicker. But not many investors have the patience for the boring stuff. And they want to start seeing sort of commercial opportunities, and they want to start seeing some early revenue coming in before they invest more dollars. And I'm just not sure that's a trajectory for the majority of startups in this space. And then the final thing I will say is, especially if it's a direct-to-consumer product, just generating trust, social proof and trust are just critical. As Jessica said before, this is about people's health. So, not shortcutting, that very important step around creating trust in the brand. And again, most startups are defined by their product. They don't really, take a lot of care and attention in building their brand and their communication and their messaging. And they end up really honing in too much on the tech and the product. So I would say also to think broader than, the product is just one of your early deliverables. It's not the company.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I think that you're saying as well, too, this confluence of people running into the health tech space. That you usually say that the healthcare is very disruptible, meaning that there's lots of opportunities to make positive impact. And so it's really nice to see this explosion on the scene. But as you've mentioned, and why we have people like yourselves to lead people down this rabbit hole in a very strategic and effective way, so that you're not running down and finding yourself lost. So all really good ideas. So just want to end this with you, Jessica, as we finish the show. Health tech is a complex, it's a new space, and there's a lot of people running into this area. So lots of things to watch for, but there's also a lot of hope. I was curious about what you're most excited about, what you see the future in health tech, and why you're excited to still be in this space.
Yeah, so you're right. There is so much to be excited about. And I think, I actually think that health tech maybe won't exist in 10 years because it will just be healthcare. I think our lives are moving to a digital world. We talk about metaverse and that kind of thing, which perhaps is a little bit further off for healthcare. And, the value there still remains to be seen and explored. But I think health tech is just going to be healthcare. And I also think that one thing we have to be so careful of is that around the world there's a huge amount of health inequity. And I think there's a big opportunity for health tech to be able to address that. But my fear is that actually it could also exacerbate it if we don't keep that in check and we don't keep that front of mind. And I think that's something I would really like to see more emphasis on, where, things like age tech, where, great solutions in practice, but actually how likely or how able are these people to use those technologies? And increasingly so, and that's just one example. But I would like to see it, reducing that division, and creating more opportunity for everyone across the board to receive the very best care and therefore improve the health of the world. I also think that more empowerment of patients is the future. So putting patients back in control, putting people in control of their data, for instance. So Aahuti had a really good example earlier of where, as a person, you receive different care from different physicians, different healthcare professionals for different things. And therefore, your data is stored in different places. And each of those specialists is not having a view of what's happening with other healthcare professionals and other treatment you're receiving. But actually, if a patient is in control of their information and that information follows them around, it's easier for doctors because they get to see the whole view of the patient and everything that's going on. And it's easier for patients to be able to advocate for themselves, and also make decisions about their own care, and really help to then build those trusted relationships. So I think that's something that I'm really excited about. And I also think that trust, as we've talked about, is a really big topic. And I think health tech has the capability to enable or enhance the trust we see right across the ecosystem. And traditionally, there's been skepticism from most of the healthcare system with pharma, and even patients with healthcare professionals. And I really see it, as an opportunity to actually build those relationships, make connections, and everyone be an equal partner in healthcare. And I think in doing so, it provides an opportunity for patients, patient communities to really have a voice, and really drive the future of healthcare, and be seen as experts. Patients are experts. No one knows their own experience than the person going through it. And I think it really enables an amazing opportunity for that to be heard and acted upon.
Beautiful. I love the personalization concept. And it's been very loud and clear from both of you about the ultra uber patient centricity that is and should be the way that we get into diversity, inclusion, and really an equalization of, you're saying, of relationships. It's going to be really interesting to see the way the world of trust is, and the concept of everything from facial recognition software to ambient biometrics and sort of the bioethics behind this. So lots of things to think about in the future. So that's kind of the end of the show. For anybody who's interested in getting in contact with Aahuti or Jessica, we have their contact details in the show notes below. So please look for those. Great people to partner with. If you're a startup or if you're a big pharma and you're looking for connection points, it's awesome for you to connect. Also, if you like the show, check out impetusdigital.com. These are the kinds of conversations that we have with physicians, allied healthcare providers, payers, and patients in a series of asynchronous and synchronous touch points. So for example, if you're evolving and you're looking at how to work with patients or change your protocols to make it a decentralized clinical trial, or if you're looking at incorporating some new health tech into your program, those are the kinds of things that we help you with on the Impetus Insight platform. Thanks for everybody for your time today. We would appreciate if you can like and subscribe to our channel, and also leave us some feedback on iTunes. Thanks for everybody for their attention, and Aahuti and Jessica, this was an outstanding conversation. Thank you so much.